I never thought that retirement would end up being the moment my own son tried to evict me. The morning Brian looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you don't want to end up in a nursing home, get a job." I stood in the middle of my own living room in Decatur, Georgia, calmly packed my suitcase, snapped a photo of the deed in my name, and walked out without a word. He stood there in his Friday golf polo, like I was a guest who had overstayed. Lauren wasn't home, likely at her firm, but her aura lingered on every surface, from the new granite counters I hadn't approved to the folded real estate flyers tucked under the junk mail. I didn't yell. I didn't even sigh. I wheeled my bag into the guest room, took only what I had bought with my own money, and left behind the rest. The house was quiet except for the buzz of the Nest camera by the front door, which I turned toward the wall. I stopped at the bank on Candler Road, pulled out $1,000 in cash, and used the drive-through ATM to transfer my remaining checking funds into a separate credit union account under my maiden name, Clara Jeffries. By 3:40 p.m., I was sitting in a room at the La Quinta near the airport, with both receipts printed and paper-clipped. The front desk clerk said, "1 or 2 nights?" And I said, "Let's start with a week." I spent the next 2 hours on my old Lenovo, updating passwords on every account and enabling 2-factor authentication on utilities, my pension login, and the home insurance policy. Still under my name, though I suspected not for long. At 6:12 p.m., I took a photo of the typed letter Lauren had left on the dining table and emailed it to myself as a PDF. Then I set my phone to record, sat back against the headboard, and spoke each event of the past 3 months into the mic, like a deposition: dates, names, comments, locations. I wasn't scared. I was documenting. They wanted to treat me like a burden. I would now become a witness. Back on July 6th, just 3 months earlier, I had officially retired after 42 years, working for the City of Atlanta Payroll Department, thinking I'd finally get to enjoy peace and coffee on my front porch, not realizing Brian and his wife Lauren had been circling like vultures. That first week of retirement, I remember Brian saying he was proud of me and offering to help clean out the attic. I told him it could wait until fall, once the heat broke. He insisted, showed up with 2 contractor bags and a clipboard like it was a job site. Lauren didn't come, but a sleek silver sedan parked outside 2 doors down caught my attention. It stayed idling for nearly 20 minutes, while Brian boxed up my old tax files and asked too many questions about whether the deed had ever been refinanced. I should have trusted my instincts right then. That wasn't a favor. It was reconnaissance. 3 days later, Lauren emailed me a PDF titled Property Optimization Ideas. It included budget estimates for, quote, kitchen modernization and a note about potential downsizing solutions. I laughed at first, assuming it was one of her firm's marketing brochures. But by the time I got to the page with a diagram showing my bedroom labeled as nursery potential, the air shifted. When I asked Brian about it, he smiled like it was all hypothetical, said they were just brainstorming options for the future. I replied that the only future I saw was mine, with this house, on this street, in the same chair I'd rocked him in when he had the croup. Then came the second coincidence. The HVAC guy showed up unannounced while I was on a Zoom call with my church's finance committee. He said he was there for the inspection. I told him he must have the wrong address. He double-checked his form and said, "Nope, 214 Wilkins Hollow. Says here it's a pre-sale systems check." I made him leave, but he looked confused, almost sorry. That night, I checked the mail and found a color-printed flyer from a staging company with Lauren's maiden name scribbled at the bottom. My retirement had lasted 11 days before the first crack appeared. They smiled, brought groceries, asked about my favorite recipes, then quietly took inventory of everything I owned. I'd spent 4 decades processing numbers, writing budget reports, tracking fraud reimbursements for people I never met. Somehow, I failed to notice what was happening inside my own house. But I see it now. Every kindness had an angle. For months, they dropped passive insults. "This house is outdated. You don't need all this space." And the final insult came in the form of a typed letter left on my dining table, suggesting I consider long-term care options, with Lauren's law firm logo in the corner. I didn't open it right away. It sat there for 2 days, tucked beneath the salt shaker and the placemat Brian used when he visited, like it had the right to exist in my home without my consent. When I finally read it, the language was polished and sterile, exploring elder solutions, minimizing future burdens, preparing for transitions with dignity. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into a manila envelope, and labeled it October File Legal Pressure. That phrase, legal pressure, was something I'd written in countless memos for the city, usually when we were chasing down fraud claims. Never imagined I'd use it to describe my own son and his ambitious wife. They thought I wouldn't recognize what they were doing. But I've seen pressure dressed up as care before. I saw it in 1998, when we froze the pension account of a woman whose niece tried to cash out her balance, after convincing her to sign a power of attorney while drugged in the hospital. I saw it again in 2007 when a sanitation supervisor redirected disability payments to his father's account without consent. Every time, they used family as a shield. Every time, they were so sure no one would question them. Lauren was smart, too smart. She'd left the logo but not her name. But the language reeked of her. Per our family discussions, it said. What family discussions? I'd had exactly two, one over ribs on Labor Day, and one when I told them I wanted to repaint the shutters. Neither ended with me agreeing to be institutionalized, like a stray cat someone didn't want to feed anymore. The night after I read that letter, I removed every framed photo of Brian and Lauren from the hallway wall. Not out of rage. I boxed them carefully, wrapped them in bubble wrap, and labeled the bin "Return to Sender." I also scanned the letter and forwarded it to Karen Mitchell's personal email with the subject line, "Need a legal set of eyes. Urgent." Then I poured myself one bourbon over ice and wrote down everything I remembered about our last 3 conversations. Dates, words, expressions. Especially the part where Lauren said, "You'll feel so much lighter once everything is off your plate." By mid-September, they had stopped contributing to groceries, changed the house alarm code without telling me, and scheduled a private appraisal while I was at Ebenezer Baptist Church, trying to ready my home for sale like I didn't live in it. It started subtly, the way rot seeps into floorboards before you ever hear the creak. Brian usually brought a bag of pantry items when he visited: grits, coffee, almond milk for Lauren. That stopped. I mentioned the empty fridge once, and he said, "We figured you'd want more independence now that you're retired." The tone was light, but the edge wasn't. They didn't just want me out. They wanted to rewrite the story, so I looked like the one walking away. One morning, I went to disarm the security system, and it blinked red. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. When I called Brian, he claimed it was a glitch. I knew better. They had already started rerouting my control. One code, one policy, one narrative at a time. I told myself to stay calm, let them show their hands. Then came the appraisal. The young man at the door wore a tucked polo and carried a clipboard. Said he was here to take quick photos for the estimate. I asked what estimate. He looked uncomfortable and double-checked his form. I was told the homeowners are prepping for market. They scheduled this through the realtor on file, Lauren W. He didn't even flinch saying her name. I asked him to leave and documented his license plate as he pulled away. Inside, my hands shook, not from fear but the raw insult. That was my Sunday morning. While I took communion and bowed my head for the closing prayer, my daughter-in-law had a stranger wandering through my kitchen with a wide-angle lens. That night, I checked the mail again. Tucked in between the electric bill and a sweepstakes flyer was a folded printout with photos of my house, my actual house, on a mock real estate listing. Charming mid-century potential in Wilkins Hollow. Estate ready, inquire within. I printed 2 copies, one for Karen, one for myself. Then I removed the old fireproof box from my closet, dusted it off, and started a new section labeled Wilkins Hollow Fraud, Fall 2025. I added the flyer, the appraisal date, and a sticky note with the alarm code reset incident. The more they erased me from my home, the more clearly I saw what I needed to do. I called up my former coworker and trusted attorney Karen Mitchell, who still practices family and estate law in Buckhead, and showed her emails from Lauren pushing me to, quote, transition the deed for tax reasons. Karen answered on the second ring. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since her retirement party from the city courthouse. But as soon as she heard my voice, she dropped whatever she was doing. "Clara, you don't call unless something's rotten," she said. I told her this time the rot had a last name, and it was the same as mine. We agreed to meet that Thursday morning at her home office. No delays. She told me to bring everything: emails, documents, names, dates. She was already thinking like a litigator before I finished describing the tone of Lauren's voice. I printed out 3 months of emails from both Brian and Lauren. Most of Lauren's came from her work address. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. Phrases like property streamlining, title adjustment, and multi-generational planning popped up every third line. But the most aggressive one was dated July 28th, a week after my retirement celebration. Karen read it twice before speaking. "She put this in writing?" she asked, tapping the page with her pen. "Once we file the quitclaim, things will be easier for everyone, especially your mother." Clara, that's coercive language tied to a legal instrument. If she sent this while acting as your legal advisor, we're already in ethics violation territory. I told her Lauren never formally represented me, but she dropped hints, offering to walk me through the process, suggesting pro bono deed work to avoid attorney fees. Karen's eyes narrowed. "So she positioned herself as a helpful daughter-in-law while setting you up to forfeit your home," she said. Classic predatory pivot. The attachment on that July email was a PDF titled finalquitclara.pdf. I hadn't opened it before. We did it together on Karen's desktop. It was a full quitclaim deed form, already filled out, my name typed clean across the top. The signature field was empty, but Karen noticed something else. "Look at the metadata," she said. This document was last edited July 27th at 9:13 p.m. by Lauren W. Admin. That means she had it ready before she even sent the email. I stared at the screen, heart steady. I wasn't afraid anymore, just insulted by how sloppy they'd been. Karen leaned back, folded her hands, and said, "They wanted a quiet handover. Let's make it loud." Karen found a damning phrase in a July 28th email. "Once we file the quitclaim, things will be easier for everyone, especially your mother." The attached file was named finalquitclara.pdf. She printed it on legal paper, annotated it in red ink, and slid it into a folder marked Unauthorized Filings. Karen wasn't interested in drama. She was building a paper wall they couldn't climb. "I've seen elder fraud cases fall apart over one missing date," she said. "We won't give them that out." I told her I had old files, rental agreements, signed leases, and scanned permission slips from when Brian first moved out at 19. I still had the original documents on a USB drive in my lockbox, backed up from my city laptop before I turned it in. I offered to dig through them, looking for anything Lauren might have had access to with my signature on it. Karen nodded slowly. "If she manufactured a signature using one of those forms, it's fraud. Not speculation, fraud. And if she filed it anywhere, even in draft, we've got our leverage." That night, back at the hotel, I hooked up my old Lenovo and began pulling files from the drive. Most were benign: insurance forms, lease documents, a few tax affidavits. But one stood out: a 2006 rental agreement I had co-signed for Brian's first off-campus apartment near Georgia State. My signature, slanted, distinct, slightly leaning right from my carpal tunnel, was at the bottom in blue ink. I opened the quitclaim PDF again and zoomed in on the signature line. It was the same signature. Not similar, not close. The same angle, same pressure stroke, same jagged tail on the J in Jeffries. Except this one was cleaner, flatter, clearly lifted digitally and placed onto the form like a stamp. I didn't yell. I didn't gasp. I took a screenshot, opened a side-by-side comparison window, and labeled it Forgery Evidence Signature Overlay. Then I emailed it to Karen with the subject line, "Match confirmed." She responded 6 minutes later, "That's all I needed. We're no longer in gray territory." I knew Lauren was arrogant, but I hadn't expected her to be careless. She used a form she assumed I'd forgotten, pulled a signature she never had the right to touch, and built a fake future on top of it. But here's the thing about forged bricks. They crack when the truth applies pressure. And I was only just beginning. Using my training, I pulled old files from my external hard drive and found a rental agreement Lauren had access to when I co-signed Brian's first lease. The signature on the quitclaim had been copied and digitally altered to match. The next Saturday, I drove back to the house. Not to visit, not to explain, but to confront. I parked 2 doors down and walked up the sidewalk like a stranger. The front door was locked, so I rang the bell and waited. Brian answered with that same cautious smile he used when he dented the car in high school and tried to act like it wasn't his fault. Behind him, the kitchen lights were on, and I could see takeout bags spread across the counter. I asked if we could speak in the garage. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, then stepped aside. The air in the garage was thick, stale with paint fumes and dust. I held up the printed signature comparison, my 2006 lease and the forged quitclaim side by side. He didn't ask what it was. He knew. Brian opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. I waited. He finally stammered something about Lauren, just trying to help, that she thought putting the deed in their name would protect me from liability. I didn't blink. I told him that copying someone's signature from a legal document without permission wasn't help. It was a felony. His face drained. Then Lauren's voice came from upstairs, loud and pointed. "What is she doing here? She didn't come down. She didn't need to." Her voice traveled like smoke, calculated, rehearsed. "Clara, if you can't remain calm, we'll have to take further steps. You're sounding paranoid." That word again. Paranoid. Convenient defense for a guilty party. I ignored her. I stayed with Brian. I told him that forged signatures, unauthorized appraisals, and mail with altered contact information were all documented. I said I had legal counsel. I said I had time. What I didn't say, but hoped he understood, was that the part of me that once protected him was gone. Before I left, I told him one last thing. If I received so much as a notification about changes to my homeowner's insurance or utilities, I would file criminal charges. He didn't walk me out. I closed the garage door myself and backed out of the driveway without looking in the mirror. Over the next 2 days, I checked my bank statements and saw two $2,750 payments made to Robin's Renovation. And in the trash, I found a printed flooring estimate dated August 10th with my address listed under Client Lauren W. I hadn't authorized a single upgrade. I hadn't called a contractor or signed a check. But someone had, and they were using my money to do it. My checking account showed both payments pulled via ACH, labeled Home Improvements, debited exactly 3 weeks apart. That timing mattered, just enough distance between them to avoid raising red flags. That wasn't sloppy. That was structured. I pulled the estimate out of the trash with tongs. My name wasn't on it, but my address was, and under scope of work, it listed hardwood replacement, baseboard recaulking, and minor drywall patches. Everything you'd want done before listing a home to sell. It had been printed on thick paper with a watermark in the corner, not something you get from a casual handyman. I scanned it, photographed the check number tied to the second transfer, and added both to the Wilkins Hollow fraud folder. The more I found, the clearer their blueprint became. Force me out, dress the house up, flip it while I was still legally tied to it, then stall any objections behind legal jargon and feigned concern? That evening, I cross-referenced the flooring company online. Robin's Renovation had a working number and a website full of suburban kitchen makeovers. I wasn't ready to call them yet. I wanted to be prepared. I printed every screenshot, including the company's logo, their listed address, and their About Us page, just in case they suddenly updated it after realizing who was knocking. While reviewing the second payment, I noticed something even more infuriating. The memo line on the withdrawal said pre-sale prep, not repair, not maintenance. They weren't even hiding it anymore. I highlighted that line, drew a thick box around it, and stapled it to the transaction printout. Before bed, I wrote a timeline in the hotel notepad when the first check cleared, when the appraisal happened, when the alarm code stopped working. I drew arrows, boxed key dates, underlined the days I'd been at church or out running errands. Every time I wasn't home, something had moved forward. They were betting on my absence. That was their biggest mistake. I'd worked 42 years in government accounting. I knew exactly how to follow money until it confessed. I called Robin's Renovation pretending to confirm the job, and they admitted they had already been paid for pre-sale prep on 214 Wilkins Hollow Road, which they'd been told was being flipped by a young couple who inherited it from an old lady moving into care. The receptionist answered with a bright voice, full of small-town charm, clearly not trained to suspect fraud. I gave my name as Claudia Jennings, said I was following up on a flooring estimate for my niece's new home. The woman asked for the address. I gave it. She clicked away on her keyboard and said, "Oh, that was scheduled for early October, but the job's mostly complete now. I can connect you to project management." I kept my voice light, like we were chatting over lemonade. Remind me, who booked that work? Let me see. The original contact was Lauren W., listed as co-owner. She paused, then added helpfully. She mentioned the house was being flipped after a family transition. Said her husband's grandmother was moving into assisted care and they were handling things while she relocated. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence sit just long enough to make it uncomfortable, then thanked her and hung up. I sat at the desk in my hotel room and stared at the phone like it had insulted me personally. They didn't even have the decency to call me difficult, just absent. The phrase, handling things, echoed louder than the rest. That was the lie they'd wrapped around every choice. Brian and Lauren weren't just orchestrating a real estate heist. They were narrating it as a mercy act. In their version, I'd wandered off quietly into a facility, grateful to be unburdened while they cleaned up the mess I left behind. I took out my notebook and added a new entry, Robin's call, Lauren listed as co-owner, false statement about assisted care. I then forwarded the number to Karen, along with a typed summary of the call. I knew she'd follow up with a formal inquiry, possibly subpoena the invoice trail if we had to escalate. Every lie they told was just a new string I could pull. And I wasn't tugging anymore. I was yanking the whole damn web down. On October 3rd, I received a notice from the HOA Architectural Review Committee with Lauren's name listed as the point of contact on a pending request for security upgrades and landscaping changes, submitted without my signature. It arrived, folded inside a plain envelope, no stamp, just slid through the doorframe of my hotel suite by someone working the front desk. The letterhead was familiar, Wilkins Hollow Homeowners Association, same bold serif font they'd used since 1993. I read it twice, then flipped to the second page where the proposed changes were detailed: camera installation, gate code revision, removal of the boxwoods, and installation of gravel for easier access. At the bottom, in fine print, the approval request listed the responsible party as Lauren W., co-owner, not co-resident, not tenant, co-owner. I checked the line for owner signature and saw a printed name instead of a wet signature. Lauren had typed it, confident that no one would question it. They were trying to lock me out in every sense of the word: security systems, landscape design, public record. She was engineering physical removal in tandem with legal fiction. I called the HOA office and asked for a copy of the original submission. The receptionist hesitated, but I mentioned the phrase potential forgery, and suddenly she was cooperative. Within an hour, I had a scanned copy in my inbox. It matched everything in the envelope, same phrasing, same attachment showing proposed layouts, even a screenshot of the current driveway with annotations in red, suggesting where the new gravel should go. That photo had been taken from inside my own kitchen window. They'd used my home to prepare for a life I wasn't invited to participate in. I printed the entire package, highlighted every reference to Lauren's assumed authority, and marked the hearing date, October 28th. The committee had flagged the submission as pending owner confirmation. That word, pending, was my opening. I mailed a certified letter to the HOA address with a formal objection, citing fraud, unauthorized submission, and providing a copy of the deed under my name only. I requested the item be tabled until I could appear in person. I included Karen's card and a notarized statement affirming I had not approved any of the changes. They weren't just redesigning a house. They were trying to disappear me from the property altogether. That night, in my hotel room near the airport, I stared at my retirement account, $118,000, and cried not from fear, but from grief that the child I sewed Easter suits for had turned me into an obstacle to be removed. I hadn't touched the account since my last direct deposit cleared in July. 4 decades of early mornings, city pay stubs, budget meetings that dragged into nightfall. And now, all I had was a list of digits on a screen and a folding key card for a room that wasn't mine. The air conditioner rattled. I turned it off and sat in the silence, notebook open on my lap, trying to chart what part of Brian had rotted. Was it marriage? Pride? The ease of lying when someone else picks up the tab? I thought about the time he scraped his knee outside the Piggly Wiggly and clung to my leg, crying like the world was ending. How he used to slide notes under my door apologizing for talking back. I thought about the dinner after his high school graduation, when he asked if he could keep living at home a little longer while figuring things out. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Now I was a legal inconvenience he'd tried to process quietly. I opened the file folder, labeled Immediate Action. It held the quitclaim forgery comparison, the renovation invoice, the HOA submission, and the voice memo I'd recorded after the Robbins renovation call. One after another, I read the dates and rechecked the sequence. There was no doubt. This was a campaign, not a misunderstanding. Coordinated, layered, and executed while I was still folding his laundry and buying almond milk for his wife. I closed the folder and placed it beneath the safe in the room closet. Then I logged into my pension portal and printed out the statement, showing full control still in my name. I printed the insurance policy next, then the digital confirmation from the deed registry showing no change in property status. I wanted proof, not just for court, for myself, to remind me that the home I paid for, scrubbed clean every spring, defended through layoffs and plumbing leaks, still belonged to me and me alone. There was nothing accidental about what they'd done. It wasn't a miscommunication, it was a strategy. And I wasn't going to mourn my way through it. With Karen's guidance, I filed a formal cease and desist and requested a hearing with the Wilkins Hollow HOA, scheduling it for October 28th at 6 p.m. in the community clubhouse, sending a certified packet to both Brian and Lauren. We met that morning at Karen's small Buckhead office, bookshelves lined with case files, her old paralegal, Joyce, still answering phones with the same no-nonsense tone I remembered from City Hall days. Karen wore flats and a navy sheath dress, like she was headed to trial. She handed me a 3-page cease and desist notice, along with a drafted statement addressed to the HOA board. "You'll read this at the hearing," she said. "Keep your tone steady. Stick to the facts. Let the paper carry the weight." The cease and desist outlined every incident: unauthorized financial activity, forgery of signature, contractor payments without consent, and fraudulent HOA filings. It cited Georgia statutes on elder financial abuse and property interference, complete with subsections and case precedent. Karen didn't deal in vague threats. She knew how to make paper bark. I took the packets directly to the post office myself, requested delivery confirmation and signature receipts. Brian's was addressed to his office at the logistics firm. Lauren's went to her law office downtown, under her maiden name, just as she'd used on the fake paperwork. I stood at the counter while the clerk affixed the certified mail labels and stamped the date. October 12th, 14 business days before the hearing. No one could claim surprise. Back at the hotel, I logged into my email and submitted the official request to the HOA board, attaching my scanned documents, photos of the forged form, and the audio transcript from the renovation call. The system auto-replied with a confirmation code and stated the submission deadline had been met. I printed that page and highlighted the timestamp. Later that evening, Karen forwarded me a copy of the subpoena request she filed for Robbins Renovation's payment record. She'd marked it urgent and noted possible misuse of elder funds under false representation. If the company complied, and most did when legal language landed on their desks, I'd have hard proof of who authorized the payments, from what account, and under what claim. I added a new tab in my binder labeled HOA Hearing Prepared Docs. No more waiting for the next offense. Now we were setting the schedule. At the hearing, under flickering fluorescent lights, in front of 23 neighbors and 3 board members, I arrived in my pressed navy blazer and handed out evidence packets, including the forged quitclaim draft, my real signature overlay, and a screenshot of Lauren's fake renovation timeline. The clubhouse smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. Rows of gray plastic chairs faced a folding table at the front, where the board sat. James Fulton at the center, flanked by Teresa Lynn and Charles Denman. Most in the room were familiar, neighbors who'd watched Brian grow up, people who'd waved from driveways but never asked more than, "How's retirement?" Now they were here to witness something much colder. I distributed the packets without ceremony. No introductions, no theatrics, just facts. Inside each folder was a printed side-by-side of my authentic 2006 lease signature and the identical version used on the quitclaim draft. I included a cover sheet outlining the timeline, with dates cross-referenced to bank withdrawals, contractor invoices, and the HOA submission signed fraudulently under Lauren's name. Once everyone had a copy, I stood and began reading my prepared statement. I didn't rush, I didn't editorialize. I stated that I was the sole legal owner of 214 Wilkins Hollow Road. I stated that I had not authorized any renovations, security upgrades, or landscaping changes. I referenced the voicemail transcript from Robin's renovation, confirming Lauren had represented herself as the co-owner of a property recently inherited. I added that I was not in assisted care. I was standing in front of them, with receipts and documents to prove every word I spoke. When I finished, the room didn't go silent. It went still. The kind of stillness that comes when a crowd realizes they've been complicit in something by doing nothing. James Fulton asked one question: "Do you have proof of payment for the renovation work?" I handed him a copy of my September statement, showing both $2,750 withdrawals, and highlighted the memo line, "Pre-sale prep." Teresa Lynn asked if Lauren or Brian were present. I answered no. Charles Denman, usually the quietest, said, "We'll deliberate now. But let me say, Mrs. Jeffries, this shouldn't have had to come here." The board moved to the adjoining office. I remained seated, surrounded by the quiet rustle of neighbors rereading my timeline. 10 minutes later, the door opened, and James returned with the committee's decision. I played a voicemail from Robin's renovation confirming they were told the resident was out, then passed around the forensic signature analysis, and Lauren's email with the line, "We'll make sure Clara is comfortable somewhere safe." James Fulton asked me to replay the message. I held up my phone, pressed speaker, and let the contractor's voice ring out again. "We were told the resident had already vacated. The couple said they were inheriting the house and needed work done fast." The words weren't dramatic. They were damning. Clean, casual, and fully unaware of the trap he'd walked into. That was the strength of it. No one fabricates something that specific by accident. Once the audio ended, I handed James the printed transcript, already notarized. Teresa Lynn leaned forward as she read, lips tightening. I followed with the email Karen and I had flagged from July. Lauren's breezy promise to Brian. "We'll make sure Clara is comfortable somewhere safe." The phrasing wasn't just cold, it was strategic. They'd mapped out my erasure with phrases that sounded caring if you didn't look too hard. Then came the signature analysis. I explained how we traced the forged mark to a 2006 rental form Lauren had accessed during Brian's college years. I showed the overlays, the identical slant, the curve of the J, the flattened angle of the loop on the F. It wasn't speculation. It was replication. Professionally confirmed and documented by a forensic analyst Karen had worked with during a pension embezzlement case back in 2013. I handed out the report, 6 pages, annotated with a conclusion that used the words clear duplication, digital copy, and non-original form. That was when the room shifted. Until then, most of the neighbors had stayed quiet, watching like it was a soap opera that didn't involve them. But once the documents landed on their laps, eyes narrowed, heads shook, mouths opened, not in disbelief, but recognition. These weren't strangers I was accusing. These were people they invited to cookouts. The quiet betrayal hit harder when it came dressed in familiarity. James didn't ask for more. He turned to the board, and after a brief exchange I couldn't hear, he faced the room. "This application is nullified," he said. "Effective immediately. All pending requests are suspended, and a record of this hearing will be filed with the HOA and retained in our internal archive." Teresa didn't wait for permission. She looked straight at me and said, "You tried to take your mother-in-law's house?" The HOA president, Mr. James Fulton, raised his voice and declared Lauren's application invalid, while board member Teresa Lynn asked bluntly, "You tried to take your mother-in-law's house?" And Brian said nothing, just sat there frozen. He'd slipped in 10 minutes before the hearing ended, wearing a wrinkled Oxford shirt and clutching his phone like a lifeline. He must have known by then the packets had circulated, the transcript played, the board alert and no longer neutral. Still, he sat near the back, behind a woman who used to carpool his Little League team, thinking maybe silence could shield him. When Teresa called him out, her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Tired of watching decent people get played by the ones closest to them? Brian didn't respond. Didn't shake his head, didn't deny, just stared at the floor like it might open and swallow him whole. He wasn't confused. He was caught. Karen, seated to my right, leaned over and whispered, "This is when we move." We exited quietly while the board closed the meeting, stepping into the evening air with our next action already forming. She dialed her contact at the bank as we walked to the car. Not her assistant, Not a paralegal, a compliance officer she knew from a previous fraud case. "We need a temporary freeze," she said, handing me the phone. I verified my identity, confirmed the last 4 transactions from my checking and savings accounts, and requested a fraud alert tied to any outgoing payments over $500. The officer flagged both accounts, added a verification lock, and issued a formal incident number, FF number 94211GA. By 8:10 p.m., I had confirmation in hand and an email copy sent to my personal account. Karen nodded once and said, "We just bought ourselves breathing room." That mattered more than anything. Time they couldn't manipulate, space they couldn't control. When I returned to the hotel, the voicemail light was blinking. It was Brian. He said he didn't know what Lauren had done, that he'd never intended for things to go this far. His voice cracked halfway through, but I didn't rewind. I didn't respond either. Apologies don't unforge documents. Regret doesn't erase theft. I transferred the message to a secure folder, marked it audio post-hearing. Within a week, Lauren was suspended by her firm pending an ethics investigation. Brian left the house, and neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years dropped off cards and warm banana bread, saying, "We're sorry, Clara. We had no idea." The firm moved fast once Karen submitted the complaint. The packet she sent included the quitclaim draft, the email thread with the metadata showing Lauren's edits, and the audio transcript of the Robbins renovation call, plus the notarized statement from me declaring she'd never represented me in any legal matter. By Tuesday, the firm issued a formal response acknowledging receipt and stating that Lauren W. had been placed on administrative leave pending internal review and third-party assessment. Karen smirked when she read it aloud. Translation, she said, "They know she's radioactive." Brian didn't try to defend her. According to a text he sent, short, clipped, full of passive language, he'd decided to give things space and was staying at a hotel for now. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask how long. I forwarded the message to Karen, filed it under post-hearing contact, and moved on. He wasn't my concern anymore. Let him explain himself to creditors and condo boards, not me. The part one didn't expect was the neighborhood. People who hadn't so much as waved in the past 5 years now came by with baked goods and folded notes, full of shame-faced kindness. One woman, Meredith, from 2 streets over, brought me a tin of cornbread and stood awkwardly on the porch until I invited her in. She told me she'd seen the appraiser that Sunday, wondered why no one mentioned a sale, but assumed I'd already moved in with family. Another neighbor, Jeff, admitted he'd heard Brian mention downsizing plans at the Labor Day block party, but figured it was part of some mutual agreement. I listened, nodded, thanked them all, and wrote their names on a notepad titled, "Witnesses Informal." I didn't need their guilt, but their accounts might still serve a purpose if the matter escalated to civil court or licensing review. The shame wasn't mine to carry. Each apology, each baked item, was another tiny wedge between the fiction Lauren had spun and the truth I'd dragged out into daylight. I wasn't celebrating, I was documenting, letting them undo, in gestures and silence, what they'd once chosen not to see. And with every knock at the door, the house began to feel mine again. On November 2nd, I returned to my house with new locks installed by Deacon Al from Ebenezer, revoked Brian's access to my online utility and financial accounts, and hung a new gold-plated key hook by the door with just 2 keys, mine and my new husband Gregory's. It was raining when I pulled into the driveway, just a slow, steady drizzle that didn't bother pretending to be dramatic. The porch light still worked. The motion sensor blinked as I stepped onto the welcome mat that Lauren had once replaced with a sleeker, monogrammed version I'd quietly thrown in the garbage months ago. I unlocked the door with a new brass key, installed that morning by a man who'd known my name long before Brian learned to spell it. Deacon Al had arrived just after sunrise, toolbox in hand, Bible in his back pocket like always. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, looked around the house once and said, "Let's secure it right." He replaced every lock, front, side, back door, even the latch on the upstairs window. Lauren once called a security risk. When he finished, he handed me both keys. I slid one onto a key ring marked CJ, kept the second aside, and gave him a quiet smile. No speech, no blessing. Just a shared understanding that something sacred had been restored. Inside, the house didn't feel foreign. It felt paused, like it had been waiting for me to return. I walked room to room with a legal pad in hand, taking inventory, not of valuables, but of small violations. The kitchen had a new set of knives I didn't recognize. The pantry held oat milk and protein powders I'd never bought. In the master bedroom, Lauren had replaced the quilt with a thin gray comforter that looked pulled from a magazine shoot. I boxed it, along with every item that didn't belong to me, and labeled the cartons to be picked up 14 days. Next, I logged into my online accounts from the desktop, in the den, utilities, credit cards, retirement fund. I changed every password, enabled biometric verification, and removed Brian's name from the authorized user list. He wouldn't find a single switch to flip anymore. Then I hung the gold key hook Gregory had given me the day before, engraved with the words, "No more access." We'd married that Sunday. Quiet ceremony. Just 5 witnesses. No son in attendance. 2 keys hung from the hook, and not one belonged to betrayal. On November 2nd, I returned to my house with new locks installed by Deacon Al from Ebenezer, revoked Brian's access to my online utility and financial accounts, and hung a new gold-plated key hook by the door with just 2 keys, mine and my new husband Gregory's. The following morning, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, with the blinds open and brewed coffee like it was any other day. Not a war zone, not a crime scene, just my kitchen. I let the pot percolate slowly while I sat at the table flipping through a stack of mail Karen had picked up from the P.O. box. Most of it was junk, credit card offers, circulars, but tucked between a tax notice and a holiday catalog was a thin envelope from the State Bar of Georgia. I opened it without ceremony. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of the ethics complaint against Lauren W., confirming that her status was now under review pending investigation and that I may be contacted for testimony. I slid the letter into the manila folder marked Legal Actions Ongoing and added a sticky note with the date. No celebration, no vindication speech. Just another item logged, controlled, and placed in its proper drawer. Gregory arrived mid-morning, carrying a bag of groceries, humming low like he always did when his hands were full. He greeted me with a kiss on the forehead and said, "You home for real now?" I nodded. No disclaimers, no what-ifs. The front door locked behind him with a quiet click that felt louder than any courtroom gavel. Later, I cleared the bookshelf in the living room. Every photo that had once featured Brian and Lauren was gone. Not burned, not broken, just removed. In their place, I framed a copy of the house deed, stamped and certified, alongside the original welcome letter I received from the HOA in 1988. Beside them, a new picture, me and Gregory in front of the courthouse, grinning like we had nothing to prove to anyone. I didn't rebuild the house. I reclaimed it. Not for nostalgia, not to prove a point, simply because no one was going to write me out of my own story. Not with signatures, not with silence, and not with sweet-sounding lies wrapped in legal paper. The locks are changed, the keys are few, and the door stays closed unless I say otherwise.